Hello Infiniteers, I'm back in my Timeless River toy box, and believe it or not, we are almost done with this series. I'm going to start working on the logic for Timeless River today, and I'll finish that up next time. Then on Friday I'll move on to Maleficent's Castle. It will only take 1 or 2 episodes to do the build for that toy box, and then 1 episode for the logic. So, Lord willing, we should be done with my Kingdom Hearts series by the end of next week. But for this episode, I'm going to implement the logic for the battle here on Cornerstone Hill and the battle with Pete over at the wharf. This is part of the mission logic, and it's pretty simple. But before we can do that, we need to add the Cornerstone of Light here on Cornerstone Hill. Here's a screenshot of Cornerstone Hill that shows the Cornerstone of Light. It's a large, round, glowing gem that sits in the center of this area. There are some blocks placed all around it, presumably to keep it from rolling away, and it's not very secure, as we saw in that game when Pete easily stole it. But the closest object that we have in the toy box that matches that is the Power Sphere. And it's a special kind of physics ball that can damage players, enemies, and destructible objects like these fences when it touches them. So we have to find a way to place this toy so it doesn't roll around and destroy the scenery or cause problems if we accidentally shoot it during the battle. And so if we just place it here, it will tend to kind of roll around a little bit on its own. So that doesn't work real well. And of course, if you shoot it or bump it, then it can really go rolling and flying and roll up against the hill and just cause all kinds of issues. So we can't just place it here by itself. We can put it inside a scalable barrier block. The problem with that, though, is that you can't really reduce this thing in size too much, and it will roll around inside that. And when it bumps up against the edges of the scalable barrier block, it will make a crashing sound, and it just makes it over and over and over again. So that's not really helpful either. And so what we're going to do, we're going to build a little pedestal, I guess you could call it, to set it on, and I'm going to use this locator for the radar marker here in a little bit, but let's put this kind of in the center of this area where we want this to go. So I'm going to place that right there. This locator is not connected to anything right now, and don't worry about the other locators and Creativitoys. I'll cover those in a little bit. So to build a pedestal, we're going to use several path creators and some blocks. So we're going to come 1 nudge to the left here and drop that, and actually let me delete that because it didn't put me in point mode. There we go. We're just going to drop this 1 nudge below the terrain like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on either side of this locator. And 1 more. Like that. Okay, and in a moment we're going to connect some blocks up to these. So for the properties on all of these paths, we want to turn off auto start objects when connected, because we don't want any of these blocks to move. They're going to be stationary. And 1 more. Don't know if you can hear that banging going on, but my wife's doing something upstairs. Not sure what she's up to. All right, and then we're going to raise the locator up 1 notch like that. Okay. All right. For the pedestal, if we come down now to the blocks drawer, we're going to use 4 of these triangle blocks, all right? And just so these don't cause any issues up top, we'll place them down below, because once again, when you connect these to a path, the game still thinks they're sitting where you place them, so it won't let you place any other objects there. All right, we're going to open up the styling menu for this, and we're going to use the castle brick. It's a nice gray theme that fits this pretty well. I'll set that to be my theme, and then we're going to drop 4 more of these. And then for each of these, we're going to connect those to one of the paths up above. And I'm sorry this thing keeps spinning my camera around. It's going to do that a lot while I'm building this. Alright, so then we select the block, go into the properties, toy box path, and on the vertical offset, if you take this down to -3, that looks very similar to what we had in the game. But it's still pretty easy to bump the power sphere out of this area, so we're actually going to put it at -2, which is a little bit bigger than I would like, but it functionally works a little bit better. Alright, then we'll come down and grab the next one. New path connection. We'll connect that to the next path. Select that block, properties, change the vertical offset to -2. Right, next block. And we're just doing the same thing for each of these. Nothing too fancy here. Alright, and the final block will connect up to the other path. Okay, so there we go. And then we'll place the power sphere right there in the middle of that. Now, one of the problems, though, is you can still shoot this thing and it'll come out of that little area. And so I'm going to put down a scalable barrier block around it anyway. So just like that. And we're going to change the properties on the block so that the collision effect is off, because I don't really want to see this thing. Alright, and then we'll drop the power sphere in here. And actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and connect up our radar marker and our dynamic trigger to this locator. It's going to be easier to do that before we put the power sphere in here. So a new locator connection on each of those toys, connect up to that locator. Alright, and then we'll put our power sphere in. And again, that's up under the Instant Fun category. And you can't just place it in here like this, you kind of have to drop it in place. There you go. And now it sits right there in that little cradle. And that's pretty good. Now, with the scalable barrier block around it, you shouldn't be able to touch that thing. However, I can throw stuff at it and hit it. And now you can hear it's hitting that scalable barrier block. But at least it's not getting away from that barrier block and destroying the fences. So we kind of have 2 lines of defense here. We have those little triangle blocks that's keeping that from rolling around. So as long as we don't touch it or shoot it, it'll sit in that little cradle and it won't make that annoying banging noise. But if something does hit it, at least the barrier block will stop it and it won't go rolling around destroying everything. So that's the Cornerstone of Light. And now that we have that, and we figured out how to keep it from rolling around and destroying things, we can work on the mission logic for this area. So we're going to start with Cornerstone Hill. And I've got 5 locators that I've placed. And let me zoom out so you can kind of see how I've placed those. The exact placement of them doesn't really matter. The little blue dots are facing the Cornerstone of Light. And we've connected up this enemy wave generator to all of those locators. And again, you do that with the new locator connection. And to save time, I've configured the wave because that list is kind of long to scroll through, time-consuming wise. But I've added 5 swarming symbiotes. And that's all I've done here so far. So before we move on to the wharf, let's go ahead and hook this area up. So I've already connected the radar marker to that locator. So now we'll come into the properties. The beacon type, we're going to set that to be a yellow arrow. Beacon location needs to be the locator. And I want this on when we come into the toy box by default. And that puts the little radar marker up on top of that. For the dynamic trigger, the properties on that, again, the target needs to be the locator. Trigger distance for this, we're going to set it to be 30. Like that. Alright, so on the dynamic trigger, when the player enters the area around the Cornerstone of Light, we're going to generate those enemies. So on the dynamic trigger, we're going to do a new logic connection. When entered by player, any, we'll generate the wave. And we also don't need the radar marker anymore because that's to bring the player over here. So on the dynamic trigger, new logic connection when entered by player, any, we deactivate the radar marker. And we only want to do this once. So on the radar marker, a new logic connection. When this is deactivated, we'll turn around and turn off the dynamic trigger. And there we go. So this area is done. Now, when the player defeats this wave, this is going to kick off the next set of logic over here at the wharf. And I've got a lot of toys over here, but don't worry about it. So we have a locator. I'm going to go through these in detail. So we have a locator, and connected to that I have an enemy wave generator and a friendly wave generator. The enemy wave generator, again, we connected it up to that locator with the new locator connection. And for the wave, I've configured that to use one fixer. This is an enemy out of the Force Awakens playset. And on the friendly wave generator, we connected that up with that new locator connection to that locator. And I've also set the wave on this for Peg Leg Pete. And the idea is I wanted Pete represented here somehow, but Pete is a townsperson and not an enemy. And I can make him an enemy by putting him on a team, but he's not very threatening. When you defeat him, he just vanishes. So my thinking is we'll see him initially in his form as Pete, and then after we talk to him and approach him and talk to him, he'll change and transform into the Fixer, which is a much more powerful enemy. And then we've also got some additional enemies that will show up once the battle starts with this enemy wave generator that's connected up to those 4 locators. And again, the placement of the locators doesn't matter, just in that general area. The idea is they'll be behind the player once they're over here battling Pete. So the wave for this I configured. Oops, I thought I configured. I must not have saved it. But anyway, you scroll down in the list. We're going to use the swarming symbiotes, and I'm going to use 4 of them. Okay. And then we also have some additional toys. I have an effects generator, a radar marker, a dynamic trigger, a text displayer, and 2 time delayers, one here and one over here, and a level starter. All right. So let's start by setting the properties on these. So on the enemy wave generator, everything under here is fine. We're just going to take the generation delay to 0. On the friendly wave generator, properties, again, take generation delay to 0. Everything under here is fine. Under the generated friend options, we'll set his behavior for Pete to be angry. And that will cause him to stand still, but he'll be a little animated. And did I set the properties over here? I can't remember if I did that. I don't think I did. I did not. We want to take the generation delay to 0 there as well. All right. The effects generator is going to be connected up to this same locator. And that doesn't have any properties. For the radar marker, we're going to connect this up with an actor connection to Pete, to our friendly wave generator. We're going to do the same thing with the dynamic trigger. New actor connection, connect that up to the friendly wave generator as our actor. And on the properties for the radar marker, again, the beacon type will be a yellow arrow. Beacon location this time is the connected actor, and we're going to leave this off by default. On the properties for the dynamic trigger, this is for Pete. We'll change the target to the connected actor, and the trigger distance, we'll leave this set to 10. For the text displayer, because we want Pete to say a few things, on the properties for that, we're going to change the text duration to 4, text style to banner. So it'll be nice and big text. Can't miss it. This time delayer, we're going to leave that set at 1 second. So nothing to change there. And on this time delayer, we're going to change this one to be 4 seconds. So 4 seconds after the battle, we're going to generate the Heartless. And on this enemy wave generator, again, take the generation delay to 0. All right, so let's go ahead and hook all of those up. And again, this is all kicked off on that end over at the wharf by this wave being defeated. So on the enemy wave generator over here, we're going to do a new logic connection. When the wave is defeated, first thing we'll do is turn on the radar marker over here. Second thing we want to do is put Pete in the toy box. So we're going to do a new logic connection on that enemy wave generator when the wave is defeated. We'll come over here to our friendly wave generator and generate the wave. And then this dynamic trigger, I don't want this active until we get to this part of the mission. So we're going to turn this off by default with our level starter. So on the level starter, a new logic connection on catalyze. We'll turn that off, the dynamic trigger, which means we'll need to turn it on when we're ready. So over here on our enemy wave generator at Cornerstone Hill, new logic connection. When that wave is defeated, we want to turn on our dynamic trigger. Okay. So that brings the player over here to Pete. And when they approach the radius around Pete that this dynamic trigger sets up, we're going to kick off the next part of the mission. And what we want to have happen is we want to have Pete he wants to say something, and then we'll wait a second, and then we'll have him transform into the fixer. So on this dynamic trigger, new logic connection, when entered by player any, we're going to come over to our text displayer. And under the loss category, we'll scroll down and he's going to say, not this time. Because in the original Kingdom Hearts 2, the player had a battle with Pete at this very location and Pete lost. So he's going to say, not this time. And then on our dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when entered by player any, we're going to kick off the time delayer because we want the player to wait a second to see that text before we do anything else. And then on the dynamic trigger, one last thing, a new logic connection when entered by player any. We can turn off this radar marker for Pete because we don't need that anymore. And once again, we only want to do this behavior one time. So on the radar marker, new logic connection, when that's deactivated, we'll turn that dynamic trigger back off. Okay, so the text is up, and the time delay, the duration of the text is 4 seconds, but this is only 1 second. I initially had this to 4 seconds, but it takes a few seconds for Pete to be removed and the fixer to show up, and so 1 second seems to work best here. So on this time delayer, new logic connection, when the delay is completed, first thing we want to do is remove Pete, so we'll defeat that wave. Next thing we'll do, on the time delayer, a new logic connection, when the delay is completed, we want to come over to our effects generator, and we're going to play a special effect to kind of cover this all up. So we're going to play one time out of the explosions category, the green energy explosion. That kind of matches Maleficent's energy. So it's like her power that's transforming him. And then on the time delayer, a new logic connection, when the delay is completed, will generate the wave for the fixer. So it'll take out the Pete townsperson, it'll put in the fixer enemy, and it'll cover it up with this green effect. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to kick off this time delayer. So on this time delayer here, new logic connection, when the delay is completed, we'll start that one. And when this time delayer goes off 4 seconds later, new logic connection on delay completed, will generate that wave. So the player will be over here engaged with Pete, and then we're going to kind of ambush the player with some Heartless. They're going to come up from behind the player. So that'll make this even a little bit more epic. Alright. Now once Pete is defeated, we're going to kick off the next part of the mission. But we're going to do that next time. The only thing we want to do today is on this enemy wave generator, a new logic connection when the wave is defeated. We'll come over to our text displayer, and under the negative category, Pete's going to say, that's enough. He's had enough. Alright, and that is the logic for the Cornerstone Hill battle and the battle here at the wharf. So it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of toys here, but it's pretty easy to follow, hopefully. And one more thing, I did drop a chest over here, kind of like we had in the original Kingdom Hearts game. And we'll leave all the properties set the way they are by default, but we'll configure the loot so that it will drop a health capsule. Not that that's necessarily needed, but I suppose it could be. But the main thing is just to kind of capture the feel of what Kingdom Hearts had, because they had a treasure chest up here. They also had one down here, but I think one chest is going to be fine. And we'll put the player down over here so I don't kick off any of that logic because at this point you'll want to save your toy box. But that's the logic for the battle on Cornerstone Hill and the battle with Pete. Next time I'll show you how to implement the logic for the 3 tasks that open the portal to Maleficent's castle. Thank you for watching. Before you go, I want to remind you that I have logic diagrams on my blog to help you connect the Creativitoys that I used today. The link is in the video description. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe so you can follow along with my current and future toy box projects. That's all for me today. Take care.